Hey gang, thanks for tuning in. I'm doing this very, very special report on these late allegations, these crazy allegations against Vince McMahon. But I wanted to give you a heads up before we get started. There are some pretty crazy things in this story that unfortunately we have to go into some detail on. So please use discretion. Let's get started. This is the fall of Vince McMahon. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is part 7 of the fall of Vince McMahon. The sex trafficking begins. And I know I already put a disclosure at the beginning of this video. I just want to throw another one out there. This is where things start to get really, really dark. So roll up your sleeves, put your gloves on, and let's dig in. If you haven't checked out parts 1 through 6, please do catch up with us because this is a whole big overarching story. I've put it down I've chopped it all up. I'm trying to make it a little bit easier to go down. It's easy with, a story this large to sort of get overwhelmed. So I've got it in little bite-sized pieces that might be a little bit easier to consume. Part 6 was called Cat and Mouse. We sort of talked about this back and forth game that had been established with Vince where he kind of would tell her one thing and then do something else. And he was kind of, the imagery that I was getting was a cat sort of playing with a mouse that it had caught, warning her that they can't go public or their lives will be ruined, and then basically going public with everything that they're, that they're doing that's inappropriate. On the other hand, every time she expresses an unwillingness to do something else, he threatens her. The furloughs come in, but he manages to protect her even though everybody else in her department gets fired. So, again, just more ways that he's exacting control over her life, little by little. Okay, part 7, the sex trafficking begins. Summer, fall 2020. This is sort of one of those event horizons, I would call it, right? From the first time she knocked on his condo door to the first time that they had sex, to when she accepted the job that he was able to get for her. This is another one of those sort of changes of note. This is a point of no return that we're crossing at this point. In May of 2020, Vince recruits his physical therapist to have threesomes with himself and Grant. I believe this is a physical therapist who worked at the clinic with the doctor that Vince had urged Grant to go see. Vince sends her flowers and calls her his girlfriend in an attempt to stifle her clearly communicated apprehension to the arrangement. So if you remember in the last video, she was like, hey, look, I'm not interested in bringing anybody else into the bedroom with us. I'm not interested in doing any of that. And previous to that, he had been acting kind of cold. He had only been sort of referring to her in this sort of explicit way, stopped calling her even his friend, and started using possessive words, calling her my bitch and other things like that. And now we see a complete 180, right? He's buying her flowers. He's calling her his girlfriend. He's sort of laying it on really thick to try to get what he wants. On May 9th, 2020, that is the day that the threesome is scheduled between Vince, Grant, and this unnamed physical therapist. Grant arrives and, of course, as the lawsuit claims, expresses apprehension. And Vince does something very unexpected. He tells her that he loves her. The lawsuit claims that she was basically dumbfounded, that I guess this would be the verbal equivalent of smacking her on the head with a hammer and dragging her into the room. That's sort of what's implied by the lawsuit. Not sure that that's exactly how it happened, but that's what's conveyed in the lawsuit. Early in the encounter, Vince defecates on her head and forces her to remain in the bed while performing sexually with the physical therapist, and he leaves to go take a shower. If you want to subject yourself to it, there is a more explicit definition of what happens, but that's basically what happens. That's the short of it. They say forced. They don't go into any detail as to how that happens, but he leaves the room. He takes a shower. Feces remain in her hair. Before they started, she requested protection, but it was not provided. It's reported that Vince basically just said, "Don't worry about it. We're both clean." It lasts roughly an hour and a half. This is described very traumatically, as one could imagine. For the vast majority of people, it would be quite traumatic. But this event occurs, according to the lawsuit. Again, we're talking about, one of the areas that has sort of been under threat with Vince this entire time, but hasn't really been breached, is the dignity aspect. He sort of held the dignity out, right? Financially, he's got her on the hook. Professionally, he's got her on the hook. But he hasn't, it's not like he's posted these explicit pictures on Facebook or anything. He's told her that he's shared them with a close group of friends, but it's not like it's, the pictures have leaked to the Wall Street Journal or something like that. But this is the first where she's meeting the person who's, that has breached the dignity. She's having to suffer the indignity of obviously being defecated on, having to lay there and take it, having to continue to sexually satisfy somebody else. And presumably, I believe in the lawsuit, Vince does come back in and she continues to perform, again, with feces in her hair. So the degradation that comes according to that, or that's associated with that you would expect, and certainly the degradation that the lawsuit implies heavily, would be there in this instance. So we've now, again, crossed that line, right? I don't want to bring anybody else in. Oh, somebody else gets brought in, and then you have the indignity that's associated with this particular sexual encounter. 2 days later, on May 11th, Vince sends some very explicit messages to Grant fantasizing about similar future sexual encounters. Again, if you want to open the lawsuit, paragraph 138 of the filing has the snapshots. I will not be reading them here. It's a little too explicit for my comfort. So Vince's control over Grant is now almost universal. Personal, professional, financial, sexual, her dignity, her future. It's all-consuming. It's very clear that it's all-consuming. Fast forward a long way, right? We're in May. Fast forward all the way to September. It's September 23rd, 2020. And she communicates again to Vince that, again, this is, I believe, via text message, she communicates to him that there is no room for a third body. Again, clearly communicating that she's not interested in having anybody else in their bed. However, Vince's messages indicate that there is a pretty clear escalation in his sadistic fantasies. He talks about putting her in pain. He talks about choking her. He talks about humiliation. He talks about multiple partners. I would just turn your attention to paragraph 142 in the lawsuit filing. If you're interested in having more details about that, the text messages are quite explicit, and they pretty clearly define what it is he's looking for. I will just read one brief excerpt here, a couple of brief excerpts here. Quote, "Do not knock on the door, because if I see you, I will rape you in the hallway." And quote, "I'm the only one who owns you and controls you. I want to F you." And quote, "By now thousands of men see you every day all over the world. They all want to F you." Close quote. So, again, the clear message, the message that's being communicated here is it's about control. It's about exerting control. It's about flaunting that control. Control inside the bedroom in private. Control publicly. Control of her image. It's just, I can't say control enough. That's the clear message that's being delivered by this part of the lawsuit. This escalation in talk, or in text rather, translates into the bedroom as well. So at this same time, throughout the entirety of the summer, leading into the fall, At the beginning of the summer, Vince tells Grant that he's been sharing her explicit content with a group of men backstage at tapings, and they formed a fan club for her. Again, the lawsuit claims that he is telling her this. He doesn't need to do this. He doesn't need to expose her to this humiliation. He's choosing to do that, right? Another aspect of the control. So again, just like there's the escalation in talk and in text, there's the escalation. There's the physical escalation that's associated with it. The filing claims, and this is a direct quote, I'll read directly from it. Miss Grant sustained brutal and painful injuries, including bleeding, bruising, swelling, and spans of incontinence resulting from McMahon's forceful use of his fists, adult toys, and objects unsafe for vaginal insertion or penetration. So again, we have some fetishes here that do not seem to be reciprocated and do not seem to be accepted by both parties. Late September, end of August 28th, 2020, Grant reports to Vince that she is injured as a result of using extra large toys that were forced into her against her will and got stuck, is her description, saying, "I got hurt in some way I'm having trouble describing." That was on August 29th of 2020. So as Vince's, again, this is the picture that's being painted by the lawsuit, as Vince's control continues to grow, as his control and influence grows, her independence shrinks, and we can just see that control inserting itself. We can see his will being inserted into her will, and sort of taking over. Again, this is the picture that's being painted. So our first real delve into darkness. Again, there's been this slow descent into darkness, and now we're sort of getting into, this isn't explicit sex trafficking that's happening here, although conceivably, I guess, if Vince paid for this third person, or if this third person provided some kind of favor, this physical therapist provided him free physical therapy or something like that, technically it could be considered sex trafficking. That's not explicitly claimed in the filing, but you can see that all the groundwork has been laid, right? He has financial control, he has professional control, he has sexual control, he has control over her dignity, he's watching her, right? They see each other sexually outside of work, and technically, I guess, he's watching her all the time at work, or could be watching her all the time at work. Her boss is inside his inner circle. So all the groundwork has been laid for her to essentially become a servant, I'll call it. I won't say slave, but a servant to Vince McMahon's wants, wills, needs, and desires for both himself and those around him. So the stage has pretty clearly been set. Coming up next, Part 8, John Laurinaitis enters the frame. So here we are. How long are we into this? An hour and a half? An hour and 45 minutes into this whole thing? We've gone through 7 different videos, and we've barely mentioned one of the named defendants, that being John Laurinaitis. He finally joins the story. We understand a little bit more about the role that he plays in this whole process, and we delve a little bit more deeply into the claims of really how the groundwork's been laid for the sex trafficking, but this is really the lawsuit claims when the real quote-unquote trafficking begins. So we're going to dive deep into that tomorrow on Part 8, John Laurinaitis enters the frame. Thank you for tuning in. If you made it this far, please be sure to check out Parts 1 through 7 if you hadn't seen this one, and please keep watching so we can keep wrestling with the business.